So now we turn to focusing on the conflict in Israel and Gaza, um, which is going to be another week of a pretty heavy topic.
Yeah.
So a few things to call out, you know, at this point. Like one thing I did want to mention right at the top is that like Israel continues to be under somewhat of a threat from rocket attacks from Hamas and other uh, militant organizations, including some surface to air and surface to surface missiles being launched from Lebanon, um, and you know Israel is in a very defensive posture and somewhat offensive posture as they respond to some of those continued ongoing threats. And I think like it's tempting to, I think, like lose track of that
Yeah.
as we think about all of the suffering that is happening in Gaza as a result of Israel's attacks on the region. But from Israel's perspective, this is a war against Hamas. And I think that's true. And Israel is responding to an overt act of war from a terrorist organization. And so, like, our ongoing coverage of this issue is, again, not about Israel's existence. It's not about Israel
Yeah.
defending itself. It is not about, like, Israel eradicating a violent terrorist organization. Like, these are all things that,
Yeah.
as a nation, are like our official position is supporting, and these are things that we should be supporting.
Yeah.
Our like coverage here is all about how this war is being waged.
Yeah.
And
And
like,
we also
yeah.
and we also absolutely need to acknowledge, and we did this the last time we talked about this, but I think that we need to acknowledge this each time we discuss this, because I don't want any words that we use to be used to justify um horrific actions
Ugh,
against
yeah.
an entire community. Like
Seriously.
I want to make it very clear that instances around the world of hate crimes towards the Jewish community have they do increase during these times of conflict,
Mm-hmm.
and that is not okay.
Yeah.
Every single Jewish person who is an innocent civilian uh, in this conflict deserves safety and
Yeah.
deserves security, whether whether they live in Israel
Mm-hmm.
or whether they live in the United States.
Yeah.
And to the extent that there is anybody in the United States or around the world that is using this as a chance to spread anti-Semitic sentiment
Mm-hmm.
or to commit hate crimes against the Jewish community, that must be strongly condemned.
Totally.
That has to be strongly condemned.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that any commentary surrounding this conflict does need to include that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I've been so fucking disgusted by the anti-Semitic rhetoric and attacks, as well as the Islamophobic rhetoric and attacks, and like all of the fucking racist vitriol that has been flying around, as as the well-intentioned people discuss how to resolve an incredibly sensitive and challenging political and security issue in the Middle East. Like, a bunch of fucking racists are taking the opportunity to hurl insults and attacks at
Yeah.
innocent people. It is fucking despicable and the worst kind of cynical, and it is fucking horrible.
Yeah.
Fuck all those people.
Yeah. So I want to make it clear that our critiques in this segment are not against the Jewish people
No.
or
no
even
way.
against the civilians of Israel. They are against the Israeli government. All right? They are against the Israeli government that is carrying out a bombing campaign against innocent civilians,
Yeah.
which there I know I pointed this out last time. I just want to reiterate this. By their own admission, the Israeli defense spokesperson, Daniel Hagri, specifically said that the emphasis, quote, the emphasis is on damage and not accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the emphasis is on damage and not accuracy. They're openly saying that they don't give a fuck about how many civilians they kill. They don't give a fuck about the people that they displace, about the lives they destroyed, the civilians that they are killing. They've openly said that. All right. The Israeli government has openly said that. And the thing is, there is a word for when you purposely target civilians as an act of warfare. That word is terrorism. When Hamas carried out their attacks, their initial attacks that killed 1,400 people, that was an act of terrorism, and it was disgusting, it was despicable, and fuck anybody that justifies it. But this response, so far, the most recent numbers are that at least 8,800 Palestinians have been killed in these attacks. We are almost up to 10,000 deaths. And that is according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Now, let's talk about that number for a sec. Let's talk about the Gaza Health Ministry for a second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people that will hear that the numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry and be like, well, hold on. Hamas controls, is the governing body within Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And the Gaza Health Ministry is a part of the government.
Yeah.
So doesn't that mean that these numbers are coming from Hamas? And doesn't that mean that we can't trust them?
Yeah. And in the past, Israeli officials, while they haven't said anything about these reported numbers, in the past they have said that the Hamas-run ministry reports civilian deaths as, quote, propaganda. So it's worth asking that question about the credibility of the casualty reports that we're seeing.
Yeah. So the best way, I would say, is to look at how they've reported on past conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And when we look at past conflicts, past major escalations, we actually do find pretty consistently that their numbers do end up matching up with the official numbers reported after the fact. So in the 2008 war, the ministry reported 1,440 Palestinians killed, and the UN, at the end of it, reported 1,385. So very close. In the 2014 war, that would have been Operation Protective Edge. The ministry reported 2,310. The UN reported 2,251. And then in the 2001 war that I remember we talked about,
mm-hmm.
the ministry reported 260. The UN reported 256.
Yeah.
So the ministry actually does have a good track record of getting the number accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that being said, it should also be pointed out the fact that this is a much more complicated situation because there is so much more bombing. This is the most aggressive bombing campaign that Israel has ever carried out.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some officials within the Gaza Health Ministry that have actually said, yeah, we're having trouble sometimes with figuring out these numbers. There's so many disembodied limbs as a result of these bombs that sometimes it's hard to figure out which limbs go with which body.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a bit of a struggle because of that. But whether or not that is a perfectly to the person accurate number,
mm-hmm.
it is a reasonably close estimation based on their previous track record, and it does not undermine the fact that there is a humanitarian crisis that is happening in Palestine, that is happening in Gaza, as a direct result of an indiscriminate, by their own admission, an indiscriminate bombing campaign against civilians.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Of those, like 8,800, we're talking about over 3,500 who are children.
Yeah.
Which like according to the humanitarian group Save the Children, this exceeds the total number of children killed across the world's conflict zones each year since 2019. So in just like 3 weeks, more children have been killed in Gaza than like annually since 2019.
Yeah.
On like yeah, according to the United Nations Children's Fund, right? So this is the UN. 420 children are being killed or injured in Gaza every single day. And as we
Yeah.
said last week, or last time we covered this topic, kids can't be terrorists.
Yeah. And 50% of the people in Gaza are children under the age of 15.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just launch bombs in a heavily crowded area like Gaza
Mm-hmm.
and expect that children aren't going to die.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes back to something that we said last week when we were talking about Alan Dershowitz's comment,
Mm-hmm.
which is, the question of, is there a what is the moral equivalency between directly targeting children for the sake of killing children and making a decision that is going to result in the death of children and making it anyway?
Yeah.
And the thing is, I don't really see much of a moral difference there, because you are
Mm-hmm.
knowingly making a decision that will result in the killing of children.
Yeah.
And they're even saying, I cannot emphasize this enough, they're even saying they're not prioritizing accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
All right? Because these officials, these government officials, do not view the people of Gaza as people. They don't view the children of Gaza as children.
Yeah.
They view them as terrorists.
Yeah. One Israeli Defense Force spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, was describing a recent military success by their measure, which was the bombing of a densely populated refugee camp called Jabalia in northern Gaza, which, like, they, it happened just yesterday, so they don't have the number of people that have been killed yet. But what witness reports describe catastrophic damage, just like people just lining up bodies covered in sheets on the road. One Al Jazeera employee lost 19 family members. And they were like this lieutenant colonel seemed to be describing this as like a success. He basically said that, according to the statement, that the airstrike was targeting Ibrahim Bayari, who they killed, and was described as one of Hamas's commanders, who was responsible for the attack on Israel on October 7th, the terrorist attack, it's great that he's killed. And the operation was also intended to take down the underground tunnels which had been formed underneath the refugee camp. And apparently they also took out dozens of Hamas combatants who were also potentially involved with the terror attack and were like killed and crushed beneath the tunnels. The thing is, though, that he specifically said that the IDF had considered all factors when making the decision to make the strike, quote, including the possibilities of non-combatants being affected.
Yeah.
We're talking about bombing a dense residential area where, yes, there are Hamas like fighters, there are Hamas military operations, but you're just acknowledging that there's also tons of people who they don't even know the number that they've killed yet, but it was worth it. And
there has actually been an update on the numbers at this point for that. And by the way, this wasn't just one. This camp was hit twice in 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
And so far, the official death count is 195. And 120 are still missing.
Mm.
So that number could be significantly higher. I'm sorry, you're not the good guy if you do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if a terrorist, or hell, if a group of terrorists, if 10 terrorists in the United States, right, a group of 10 terrorists in the United States took over a shopping mall, they took over a shopping mall and had like 100 hostages and the United States government just blew up the entire shopping mall,
Yeah.
would you be okay with that?
Yeah.
Would you actually be okay with that? Would you seriously be okay with that? If the answer is yes, then what the actual fuck? If the answer is no, then you shouldn't be okay with that in this situation either.
Yeah. 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 Seriously. The bombings are also making an incredibly difficult and dangerous humanitarian situation as well, especially in hospitals, which are like receiving bombings like all around the hospitals. So, according to the UN Palestine Refugee Agency, quote, all 13 hospitals that are located in northern Gaza are still operational in these areas, have received repeated Israeli evacuation orders in recent days. And they added that medical staff and patients include 117,000 people that are in these hospitals. And so they continue to like order these evacuations of these facilities, but there's like nowhere to go. And yet they're dropping bombs within like 200 feet sometimes of these hospitals, which are just packed floor to ceiling with people taking refuge and with patients. A UN humanitarian coordinator said, quote, for people who can't evacuate because they have nowhere to go or are unable to move, advanced warnings make no difference. Which goes back to something we talked about a couple of weeks ago, which is like Israel has been, and they provided in the refugee camp that they bombed as well, like notified people to evacuate and leave prior to these bombings, but there's nowhere to go. It's one of the most densely populated places on earth. People don't have food, water, fuel, or any place to stay or any shelter. Like they literally just have nowhere to go to even protect themselves. And so you see you see whole families and generations, like multiple generations of families just getting totally wiped out. These one Palestinian American family that I was reading about has lost 42 members of their family. It wiped out 3 generations.
Yeah. And so far, I saw that I read that 30 journalists have been killed.
Mm-hmm.
Like journalists that are trying to cover this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and what is the United States doing?
Yeah.
Like, so far, today was the first time I heard Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, Bernie Sanders should be the person who we already know is on the right side of this.
Yeah.
But like, he had been just disappointingly silent on this, and today he finally did a speech in the Senate
Mm-hmm.
where he talked about the need for humanitarian aid. He talked about the indiscriminate bombings. He condemned the Israeli government for that. And he also talked about something that we talked about previously, which I was impressed that he brought up, which is the fact that in many ways, the tensions that drove this conflict were the conditions within Palestine to begin with. The fact that Israel treats Palestinians like second-class citizens within the country, that Gaza is basically an open-air prison, that settlers are bulldozing homes and driving people from their land in the West Bank, that stuff like that actually led to these tensions. And he was, pointing out, like, even before what happened, things were not okay. It was a humanitarian crisis. And it was like, this is the first time I've heard someone talk about this, and it was the first time he actually, like, I actually heard someone call specifically for an end to the bombings, not just a pause, but an end to the bombings.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like almost 10,000 people had to die for Bernie Sanders to say that.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus Christ, how many, for the rest of the government, how many people is it going to take? Are they never going to? Like, what? I would ask every single senator, what is your number? All right? How many Palestinians are going to have to die in this for you to care? For you to say no more weapons to Israel until they promise to stop bombing, until they end this? All right, no more aid to Israel unless they end this carnage. Like how many is it going to take? Because apparently 10,000, it's not 10,000. All right? Is it 20,000? Is it 30,000? Like what level of a genocide needs to happen for you to give a shit? And then the Biden administration, God, they were asked. He was asked directly about the numbers from the ministry, and he basically said that we don't know if those numbers are actually accurate. But what's fucked up about that is that his own administration is actually using the numbers from the Israeli health ministry in their own internal situation reports. The HuffPost actually reviewed 20 State Department situation reports and found that they were actually using the numbers internally from the Gaza health ministry. So he knows that those numbers are probably accurate. He knows that.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, one of the first things that Mike Johnson is trying to do as speaker is he's actually trying to. So right now, Joe Biden is calling for a spending package in aid to Israel, to Ukraine, to Taiwan, and also for extra border security. And Mike Johnson proposed a package that is just Israel support, that is just money for Israel, and attached to it is reducing funding by about $40 billion to the IRS. He's fucking using this conflict to defund the IRS. That is the first thing that he's doing as the speaker. Trying to use this carnage in his stupid fucking mission to defund the IRS so that rich people are less, like, that rich people don't have to deal with their enforcement.
Yeah.
That is what he's doing.
Yeah.
And, Biden's already said he's going to veto it, but I mean, the fact that is what the conversation is that we're having, like, that is the level of conversation we're having. There's no suggestions of, hey, maybe we should withhold this until they stop bombing civilians, until they stop using our bombs that are paid for by our taxpayer money to go bomb children in Gaza. That's not even a part of that conversation, because that's not what Washington cares about. That's not what these people care about. It's fucking disgusting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, relief aid for the people of Gaza has finally started to flow in, but at a fraction of what is necessary to relieve their humanitarian crisis. And it includes food and water, but it doesn't include any fuel, which means that hospitals who have said that they're dangerously low on fuel, like at the absolute end of the road, will not be able to operate pretty soon. Like, the United Nations has said that there's clear evidence of war crimes committed by both Hamas and the Israeli military since October 7th. And that's pretty fucking obvious. And to Nathan's point, we're just picking a side and helping with the war crimes. And now we'll end our episode because it is not really possible or in good taste to make jokes after a segment like that.
Yeah.
But we will be taking a moment of silence for all the fucking suffering right now in Israel and Gaza.